Welcome. Tonight, we journey north, far beyond the warm deserts of Egypt, far beyond the crowded cities of Rome, to a colder world, where mountains meet the sea, where forests stretch endlessly, and where the wind carries the scent of pine and salt water. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, and imagine. The year is 900 AD. The morning sky is still dark. A soft blue light slowly appears beyond the distant mountains. Mist drifts quietly across a narrow fjord. The water is perfectly still. So still that the towering cliffs seem to float upside down upon its surface. A single seabird cries somewhere overhead. Then, silence returns. Along the shoreline, small wooden houses rest beneath thick grass roofs. Thin trails of smoke curl gently from their chimneys. Inside, families still sleep beneath warm wool blankets. Outside, the world waits patiently for another day. This is Scandinavia, the homeland of the Vikings. When most people hear the word Viking, they imagine fierce warriors, massive axes, burning villages, longships racing across stormy seas. Those stories certainly existed, but they were only a tiny part of Viking life. Because most Vikings never became famous. Most never fought great battles. Most never sailed to distant kingdoms. Instead, they farmed. They fished. They built homes. Raised children. Fed animals. Repaired boats. Shared meals beside warm fires. And watched the changing seasons pass. Just like families everywhere. Tonight, we leave the battles behind. There will be no noisy wars, no rushing armies, no dramatic heroes. Instead, we will spend our time beside ordinary Viking families. We will wake with them, eat with them, work beside them, and finally, fall asleep beneath the quiet northern sky. Our journey will carry us through peaceful villages, across sparkling fjords, into warm wooden longhouses, through forests filled with towering pine trees, along frozen rivers, and beside roaring fireplaces where stories quietly came alive. You will discover how they built their remarkable ships, what they ate each day, how they survived the endless northern winters, what games their children played, how they honored their gods, and why life in the far north shaped one of history's most remarkable civilizations. But for now, there is nowhere to hurry, nothing to accomplish, no battles to fight, only the gentle sound of water touching the shore, the distant call of seabirds, and the slow arrival of another peaceful morning. In the land of the Vikings. So settle comfortably. Allow your breathing to slow. Let your thoughts drift away like mist across the fjord. And together, let us quietly step into the peaceful world of the Vikings. A Viking village wakes. Morning arrived slowly in the far north. Unlike warmer lands, the sun did not leap above the horizon. Instead, darkness gently loosened its grip. The sky faded from black to deep blue to pale silver. Then, at last, the first golden rays touched the quiet fjord. The village began to wake. Not with loud voices, not with bustling streets, but with tiny sounds. A wooden door creaked open. A rooster crowed somewhere nearby. A cow shifted inside its shelter. Firewood cracked softly as someone stirred yesterday's embers back to life. The air was cold. Even during summer, the mornings carried a crisp chill. Each breath formed a tiny white cloud before disappearing into the still air. Villagers wrapped themselves in thick wool cloaks before stepping outside. The heart of every Viking village was the longhouse. Long, low, built almost entirely from timber. Its walls were made from thick wooden planks or woven branches covered with clay. The roof was covered with layers of grass and turf. From a distance, the houses almost seemed to grow naturally from the earth itself. Inside, the longhouse was warm. A fire burned continuously in the center of the room. There was no chimney. Instead, smoke slowly drifted upward, escaping through small openings in the roof. The room often appeared slightly hazy. Yet to the Vikings, this simply smelled like home. Entire families lived together beneath one roof. Grandparents, parents, children, sometimes even relatives and trusted workers. Everyone shared the same great hall. Privacy, as we know it today, hardly existed. Life was shared. Meals were shared. Stories were shared. Even sleep was shared. Wooden benches lined the walls. By day, people sat upon them. At night, they became beds. Soft animal skins, woven blankets, and straw mattresses provided warmth during the long northern nights. The fire was never allowed to die. It cooked meals, provided warmth, dried wet clothing, and filled the long winter evenings with comforting light. Keeping the fire alive was one of the household's most important responsibilities. Outside, animals were already awake. Sheep wandered quietly through nearby fields. Goats searched for fresh grass. Chickens scratched the ground for insects. A faithful dog watched carefully from beside the doorway. Cats wandered freely, keeping mice away from precious food supplies. Nearly every animal had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Children were among the first to rise. Even at a young age, they helped with daily work, fetching water, gathering firewood, feeding animals, carrying small tools. Life itself became their classroom. Every ordinary task quietly prepared them for adulthood. The adults soon followed. Some sharpened axes before heading into nearby forests. Others prepared fishing nets beside the water. Several inspected their boats, making sure every wooden plank remained tightly fastened. The sea offered both opportunity and danger. A careless mistake could prove costly. Women busied themselves inside the longhouse. Fresh bread was prepared. Porridge slowly simmered above the fire. Clothing damaged during yesterday's work was carefully repaired. Wool was spun into thread. Looms quietly waited for another day's weaving. Every pair of hands contributed. Unlike many stories, Viking villages were not constantly preparing for battle. Most mornings looked remarkably peaceful. Quiet routines repeated themselves day after day. Season after season, generation after generation. The rhythm rarely changed. The people understood something modern life often forgets. Great adventures were rare. Ordinary mornings were far more common. And perhaps, far more important, as the sun climbed higher, the village became fully alive. Smoke drifted lazily above every rooftop. The smell of fresh bread filled the cool morning air. Children laughed somewhere beyond the houses. The calm waters of the fjords sparkled beneath the northern sky. Another ordinary day had begun. And for the Vikings, ordinary life was extraordinary enough. Soon, we will leave the village behind. Together, we'll walk into the forests, where every tree, every stream, and every patch of earth helped shape the lives of these remarkable people. The longhouse, the center of every Viking family's world, was not a castle, not a fortress, not a grand palace. It was a longhouse. From a distance, it appeared simple. A long wooden building resting quietly beneath a thick roof of grass. Smoke drifted gently upward, escaping through a small opening near the center. The walls blended naturally into the landscape, as though the house had grown from the earth itself. There were no bright colors, no polished marble, no towering towers, only timber, stone, earth, and countless hours of careful work. Building a longhouse was never a task for one person. Entire families worked together. Neighbors helped one another. Strong pine and oak trees were carefully chosen from nearby forests. Each tree was cut by hand, dragged home, shaped with axes, and slowly transformed into sturdy beams. The roof was perhaps the most remarkable part. Layer after layer of birch bark was placed across the wooden frame. Then thick blocks of turf were carefully laid above it. Soon, grass began growing naturally across the roof. During summer, wildflowers sometimes bloomed overhead. The house became part of nature, not separate from it. Inside, the room was surprisingly spacious. One enormous hall stretched from one end of the house to the other. There were no separate bedrooms, no hallways, no private living rooms. Everyone shared the same great space. Down the very center, a long fire burned almost every hour of every day. The flames provided warmth during freezing winters. They cooked every meal. They dried wet boots. And they filled the longhouse with soft orange light. Above the fire, iron pots gently simmered. Stews bubbled quietly for hours. The smell of roasting meat, fresh bread, and wood smoke lingered in the air. For a Viking, that smell meant comfort. It meant home. Along both walls stood sturdy wooden benches. During daylight, they became places to sit, to weave, to carve wood, to repair fishing nets, to share meals. As evening arrived, animal skins and wool blankets were spread across them. The benches became beds. Entire families slept side by side. Children close to their parents. Grandparents only a few steps away. There was little silence inside a longhouse. Even during peaceful moments, life surrounded you. The crackling fire, the soft voices of family, a baby crying, a dog sleeping beside the warmth, someone quietly sharpening a knife, the gentle tapping of a loom. Outside, rain falling upon the grass-covered roof. Every sound became part of daily life. Light entered only through the doorway, or through the smoke hole above the fire. Even during the middle of the day, the longhouse remained softly lit. Nothing felt harsh. Everything seemed wrapped in warm shadows. Furniture was simple. Wooden chests held clothing. Shelves displayed carefully carved bowls. Clay jars stored grain. Weapons hung safely upon the walls. Not because danger was expected, but because every useful tool deserved its place. Decoration was modest, yet beautiful. Wooden beams often carried intricate carvings. Dragons, serpents, birds, knots that twisted endlessly into themselves. These patterns reflected stories, beliefs, and traditions passed from one generation to another. The longhouse protected more than people. During harsh winters, valuable animals sometimes shared part of the building. Their body heat helped warm the house. The family cared for the animals, and in return, the animals helped the family survive. Winter evenings were perhaps the most magical time of all. Darkness arrived early. Snow covered the world outside. The wind howled across the mountains. Yet inside, the fire glowed brightly. Stories filled the room. Children listened with wide eyes. Grandparents remembered adventures from long ago. Hands stayed busy weaving, repairing tools, or carving wood, the forest that sustained the Vikings. If the longhouse was the heart of Viking life, the forest was its lifeline. Every morning, people disappeared beneath towering pine and spruce trees. The woods stretched farther than anyone could see. Dark, quiet, ancient. To the Vikings, the forest was not empty wilderness. It was a trusted companion, a place that quietly provided almost everything they needed. Their homes came from the forest. Massive tree trunks became sturdy walls. Straight young pines became roof beams. Flexible branches became fences. Even the wooden pegs holding the house together were carved from nearby trees. Their ships also began here, long before a Viking longship ever touched the sea. It stood silently as a living tree. Shipbuilders searched carefully for the perfect trunks, strong enough to survive violent storms, yet flexible enough to bend with powerful waves. Not every tree was suitable. Choosing the wrong one could mean disaster far out at sea. Firewood filled countless wagons. Without it, families would freeze during the endless northern winters. Every autumn, woodcutters worked tirelessly, stacking enormous piles beside their homes, preparing not for tomorrow, but for months ahead. The forest also provided food. Wild berries ripened during summer. Blueberries, lingonberries, cloudberries. Children often wandered through the woods collecting them in woven baskets. Some were eaten fresh. Others were carefully stored for winter. Hazelnuts grew beneath the trees. Wild mushrooms appeared after gentle rain. Herbs filled the air with earthy scents. Every season offered something new. Hunters moved silently beneath the branches. They searched for deer, wild boar, elk, and smaller animals like rabbits and foxes. A successful hunt meant fresh meat for the family, warm fur for clothing, bones for tools. Nothing was wasted. Every part had value. The Vikings understood something important. Nature always gave, but only if it was treated with respect. Taking more than necessary would leave less for tomorrow. That lesson was learned long before anyone wrote it down. Even simple walks through the forest required experience. The woods constantly changed. Morning fog could hide familiar paths. Fresh snow covered every footprint. A sudden storm could make even a short journey dangerous. Children learned from an early age how to recognize landmarks. A twisted pine. A large boulder. The sound of a nearby stream. The forest spoke quietly. To those who knew how to listen. Many stories were born beneath these trees. The Vikings believed unseen beings also lived within the wilderness. Spirits. Creatures. Guardians of ancient places. Whether those stories were true hardly mattered. They reminded everyone to remain humble. To walk gently. To respect places older than themselves. On peaceful afternoons, sunlight filtered through thousands of green needles overhead. Birdsong echoed across the forest floor. A squirrel darted between branches. The wind whispered softly through the trees. Nothing hurried. Everything moved according to nature's rhythm. For generations, the forest remained the Vikings' greatest teacher. It taught patience, strength, preparation, and resilience. Every fallen tree became a lesson. Every changing season became another page in nature's quiet book. As evening approached, families slowly returned home. Arms filled with firewood, baskets heavy with berries, freshly cut timber resting upon wooden sleds. Smoke already drifted above the village. The warmth of the longhouse waited. Tomorrow, the forest would welcome them once again, as it always had, and as it always would. Soon, our own journey will leave the trees behind. We'll follow a narrow path toward the water, where the sea shaped nearly every Viking life. The sea that shaped a civilization. For the Vikings, the sea was never the end of the land. It was the road between worlds. While many civilizations built great highways from stone, the Vikings followed paths made entirely of water. Every fjord, every river, every coastline, every wave, connected their world together. On calm mornings, the sea looked almost perfectly still. The mountains reflected across its surface. Clouds floated upside down upon the water. Small fishing boats drifted silently from the shore. Everything felt peaceful, gentle, timeless. Yet everyone understood. The sea could change without warning. A clear blue sky could become dark within minutes. Strong winds swept through narrow fjords. Powerful waves crashed against rocky shores. Even experienced sailors respected the water. No one believed they could truly control it. Children grew up beside the sea. Before they learned to write, they learned to row. Before they understood distant kingdoms, they understood tides. They watched their parents mend fishing nets. They listened as older sailors spoke about winds, currents, and hidden rocks beneath the surface. The sea became their classroom. Fishing provided food nearly every day. Cod, herring, salmon, trout. Fish were caught fresh, dried in the wind, or preserved with salt for the long winter ahead. Without the sea, many villages simply could not survive. Seabirds also became trusted guides. Their movements often revealed where fish gathered beneath the surface. A sudden flock circling overhead could mean a successful day awaited. Nature quietly shared its secrets with those willing to observe. The coastline itself constantly changed. Tiny islands appeared beyond the mist. Hidden coves protected boats from storms. Steep cliffs rose directly from the sea. Waterfalls poured into quiet fjords. Every journey offered something beautiful, something unexpected. The Vikings rarely feared long distances. To them, travel by water often felt easier than walking through dense forests. Boats carried families, livestock, timber, grain, tools, and dreams. Entire lives floated upon wooden hulls. Some journeys lasted only a few hours. Others continued for weeks. A trading voyage might lead to distant shores. A fishing expedition might remain close to home. But no matter how far they traveled, every sailor looked forward to returning, because home always waited beside familiar waters. There was something deeply calming about drifting quietly across the sea. The gentle splash of oars, the soft creaking of timber, the steady rhythm of breathing, the cool northern breeze. Time itself seemed to slow. Even today, many visitors describe the Scandinavian fjords as peaceful beyond words. Imagine how they must have felt more than 1,000 years ago. No engines, no cities, no airplanes overhead. Only mountains, sky, water, and silence. As evening approached, boats slowly returned. Smoke rising from village chimneys became visible long before the shore itself. Children waved from the river bank. Dogs barked happily. Families gathered to welcome loved ones home. Another ordinary journey had safely ended. For the Vikings, the sea never separated people. It brought them together. Every sunrise upon the water promised possibility. Every peaceful return reminded them that home was the greatest destination of all. Soon, we'll discover the greatest wooden creations the Vikings ever built. Ships so remarkable that they carried ordinary families to the very edge of the known world. The longships. There were thousands of boats resting quietly along the shores of Scandinavia. Most were small, simple fishing boats, family ferries, river craft used for carrying timber or livestock. But every now and then, a different vessel appeared. Long, narrow, elegant, its wooden hull resting lightly upon the water, almost as though it floated without effort. This was the Viking longship, one of the greatest engineering achievements of the medieval world. It did not begin at sea. It began deep inside the forest. Months earlier, a shipbuilder had walked silently among towering oak trees. He was not simply looking for timber. He was searching for the right tree. One that had grown slowly. Straight. Strong. Yet flexible enough to survive the endless movement of the sea. When the perfect tree was finally found, it was cut by hand. Not by machines. Not in hours. But through days of patient work. Every swing of the axe echoed through the quiet forest. Every chip of wood carried the promise of a future voyage. The trunk was pulled home by horses, oxen, and many helping hands. The entire village often joined together. Because building a ship was never the work of one person. It belonged to everyone. Each plank was carefully split, not roughly sawn. Splitting followed the natural grain of the wood, making every board stronger. The planks were then overlapped, one resting gently above the next. This technique, known today as clinker construction, allowed the ship to flex with powerful waves. Instead of fighting against them, iron rivets fastened every plank together, each one hammered into place by hand. Slowly, patiently, until the ship seemed to come alive. Unlike many later sailing ships, the Viking longship remained surprisingly light. A few dozen people could carry it across land if necessary. That remarkable design allowed them to move between rivers, cross narrow strips of land, and continue sailing where others could not. Its shallow hull needed very little water beneath it. The ship could travel across open oceans, yet also glide quietly into small rivers and hidden coves. Few vessels of the medieval world possessed such versatility. When the sail finally rose, it caught the northern wind like the wing of a great bird. The square wool sail pulled the ship forward. If the wind disappeared, the crews simply lifted their oars. The steady rhythm of rowing replaced the silence. Splash, pull, splash, pull. The sound became almost hypnotic. Standing aboard one of these ships, the world must have felt endless. Mountains slowly disappeared behind the horizon. Fresh coastlines emerged from morning mist. Unknown lands waited beyond every sunrise. Yet for most Vikings, their greatest joy was not reaching distant shores. It was returning home, watching familiar mountains appear once more, seeing smoke rising from their village, knowing family waited beside the water. The longship carried more than people. It carried hope, trade, friendship, curiosity, and sometimes the simple wish to see what lay beyond the next horizon. Soon, we'll step ashore once again and discover what filled a Viking table after a long day upon the sea. Food around the Viking table. Every day eventually led back to the fire. No matter how far someone had walked, no matter how many trees had been cut, no matter how many fish had been caught. As evening approached, everyone gathered around the warmth of the longhouse. The day's work slowly came to an end. Axes were leaned against the wall. Fishing nets were hung to dry. Boots were brushed clean of mud. Children settled onto the wooden benches. The smell of supper slowly filled the room. Viking meals were simple, but they were nourishing. Every ingredient had been earned through hard work. Nothing arrived from distant factories. Nothing came wrapped in paper. Every bite told the story of the land around them. The most common meal was porridge. Large iron pots rested above the fire. Inside, barley, oats, or rice slowly cooked in water or milk. Sometimes the porridge remained plain. Other times, berries or honey were stirred into it. A warm bowl of porridge could feed an entire family. Bread was equally important. Not the soft white bread many people know today, but dark, dense loaves made from barley, oats, or rye. Fresh bread filled the longhouse with a comforting smell. It was often eaten with butter, soft cheese, or smoked fish. Fish appeared on the table almost every day. The sea provided generously. Cod, herring, salmon, trout. Some fish were roasted over open flames. Others were dried by the cold northern wind, allowing families to store food for many months. Meat was eaten less often. Animals were far too valuable to slaughter regularly. Cattle produced milk. Sheep provided wool. Goats supplied both milk and meat. Pigs wandered freely through forests searching for food. When meat finally appeared upon the table, it became a special occasion. Milk played an important role. Fresh milk, buttermilk, cheese, butter. Simple foods, yet rich with nourishment. Many families relied upon dairy throughout the year. Vegetables quietly completed the meal. Cabbage, onions, beans, turnips, peas. Everything that could survive the northern climate found its place in Viking gardens. Nothing was grown carelessly. Every harvest mattered. Wild berries added sweetness. Blueberries, lingonberries, cloudberries. Sometimes children returned from the forest carrying baskets filled to the top. Fresh berries disappeared quickly. The rest were carefully preserved for winter. Honey was precious. Without sugar, it became nature's greatest sweetness. It flavored food, sweetened drinks, and occasionally became part of festive celebrations. Water remained the most common drink. Milk was equally important. Adults sometimes enjoyed ale, brewed from barley. But unlike modern stories, daily life was not spent drinking endlessly. Most people simply focused on staying healthy enough to work another day. Meals themselves were unhurried. Family members gathered together. Stories drifted through the room. Children listened quietly. Laughter appeared now and then. Outside, the northern wind whispered against the wooden walls. Inside, the fire crackled gently. No one rushed to leave the table. There was nowhere else to be. No glowing screens demanded attention. No clocks hurried the evening forward. Only conversation, warm food, and the comforting presence of family. As the final bowls were emptied, the fire continued glowing softly. Another ordinary day had quietly come to an end. Tomorrow, the fields, the forests, and the sea would once again provide, just as they always had. Soon, we'll step beyond the longhouse once more, and discover how Viking families survived the long, cold winters of the north. Winter in the north. Winter never arrived suddenly. It announced itself quietly. The mornings grew colder. The daylight became shorter. The leaves slowly disappeared from the trees. Birdsong became less frequent. The forests fell silent. The Vikings watched these small changes carefully, because they knew winter was always coming, and once it arrived, there would be no rushing to prepare. Everything had to be ready long before the first snow fell. During autumn, the village became unusually busy. Firewood was stacked higher than a person's head. Grain was stored inside dry wooden buildings. Fish hung beneath sheltered roofs, drying slowly in the cool northern air. Meat was smoked over gentle fires. Cheese, butter, and preserved berries filled clay jars. Every family prepared enough food to survive many months. Then, one morning, snow finally arrived. It settled quietly upon rooftops, covered fences, blanketed fields, turned familiar paths into soft white trails. The world became almost unrecognizable. The fjords looked different too. Thin ice formed along quiet shorelines. The forests sparkled beneath fresh snow. Every branch carried delicate crystals that shimmered beneath the pale winter sun. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and remarkably quiet. Winter days were surprisingly short. Sometimes the sun appeared for only a few hours. The sky remained soft and pale. By late afternoon, darkness slowly returned. Oil lamps glowed inside every longhouse. The fire became the center of life once again. Outdoor work continued whenever possible. Animals still needed care. Firewood still needed collecting. Water still had to be carried. Snow never stopped daily responsibilities. It simply made every task slower. Children often welcomed the season. Fresh snow became a playground. They followed animal tracks through the forest, built small sleds, laughed as they slid down gentle hillsides. Even during difficult times, childhood still found reasons to smile. Inside, life became calmer. Women spun wool beside the fire. Clothing was repaired. New blankets were woven. Wooden bowls were carved. Fishing nets were mended. Nothing remained idle. Winter became the season of careful hands. The evenings felt wonderfully peaceful. Outside, the wind drifted across frozen fields. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Families gathered close together. Stories filled the room. Some spoke of great voyages. Others remembered grandparents long gone. Children listened carefully, imagining distant seas and mysterious forests. These stories became gifts, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Sometimes, the northern sky offered an unforgettable surprise. Green ribbons of light slowly appeared above the mountains, dancing silently across the darkness. Today, we call them the Northern Lights. The Vikings believed they carried deep meaning. Perhaps messages from the gods. Perhaps something even more mysterious. Whatever they believed, few sights inspired greater wonder. Winter also taught patience. There were days when storms kept everyone indoors. Nothing could be done except wait. The Vikings understood something we often forget. Nature could never be hurried. The snow would melt only when it was ready. Spring would return only in its own time. Eventually, almost without notice, the days slowly grew longer once again. The sun climbed a little higher. Snow began disappearing from the fields. Birdsong returned. Streams flowed freely beneath melting ice. Another winter had quietly passed, and another spring was waiting, just beyond the horizon. Soon, we'll meet the youngest members of every Viking village, and discover what childhood looked like. More than 1,000 years ago. Growing up in a Viking village. For a Viking child, The world was their classroom. There were no school buildings waiting at the end of the road. No desks. No notebooks. No bells announcing the beginning of another lesson. Instead, every sunrise brought something new to learn. Not from books, but from parents, grandparents, neighbors, and the land itself. Children woke early, usually at the same time as everyone else. There was little opportunity to sleep late. The animals still needed feeding. Water still needed carrying. Firewood still needed gathering. Even the youngest family members found small ways to help. No one expected perfection. A small child might only collect kindling. Another carried empty baskets. Older children watched younger brothers and sisters. Little by little, responsibility quietly became part of everyday life. Learning happened through watching. A boy observed his father repairing a fishing net. A girl watched her mother weave wool into warm clothing. Soon, small hands began trying the same tasks. Mistakes were welcomed, because every mistake taught another lesson. There were no graduation ceremonies, no certificates. One day, without anyone noticing, the child simply became capable. Play was never forgotten. Children invented games using whatever surrounded them. Smooth stones became toys. Small wooden boats floated in shallow streams. Sticks became imaginary swords. Snow became castles. Every season brought new adventures. The forests offered endless places to explore. Children searched for berries beneath towering trees. They followed animal tracks across muddy paths. They listened for birds hidden among the branches. Nature quietly sharpened their senses. The sea also became part of childhood. Many learned to swim, to row, to balance inside small boats. Water was not something distant. It was part of everyday life. Respect for the sea began at an early age. Winter transformed the world into a playground. Fresh snow covered the hills. Children raced down gentle slopes on simple wooden sleds. Snowballs flew through the crisp northern air. Laughter echoed between frozen trees. Even during the darkest months, joy remained surprisingly easy to find. Stories shaped every childhood. As darkness gathered outside, families sat around the fire. Grandparents spoke softly of distant voyages, brave explorers, wise kings, powerful gods, curious trolls hiding deep within the forests. Whether every story was true hardly mattered. Each carried a lesson. Each helped children understand courage, kindness, patience, or wisdom. Children also learned respect. Respect for elders. Respect for animals. Respect for nature. And respect for promises. A person's word carried great value. Keeping it mattered, even for the youngest members of the village. Life could sometimes be difficult. Illness existed. Winters were harsh. Food was precious. Yet childhood still found moments of wonder. Watching the northern lights dance overhead. Hearing wolves howl far beyond the forest. Finding the first wildflowers after a long winter. Seeing a newborn lamb take its very first steps. Simple moments became unforgettable memories. As the years quietly passed, children slowly became adults. Not all at once, but through thousands of ordinary mornings, each helping with another chore, learning another skill, listening to another story beside the fire. Growing up in a Viking village meant becoming part of something much larger than yourself. A family, a community, a tradition stretching back through countless generations. Soon, we'll meet the remarkable women whose quiet strength helped every Viking village survive. The women who held the village together. When people imagine the Viking world, their thoughts often drift toward longships, warriors, and distant voyages. But while some men sailed beyond the horizon, someone remained behind. Someone quietly ensured that life continued exactly as it should. The women. Without them, no village could survive. Not for a season. Not for a winter. Not for a generation. Each morning, they rose before much of the household. The fire was checked. Fresh water was brought inside. Breakfast slowly began to simmer above glowing embers. The rhythm of another day quietly unfolded. The work never truly stopped. Bread was baked. Milk was turned into butter and cheese. Wool was washed, spun, dyed, and woven into warm clothing. Every thread passed patiently through skilled hands. The loom became one of the most important tools inside the longhouse. Hour after hour, the steady rhythm of weaving filled the room. Click, pull, click, pull. The sound became as familiar as the crackling fire. Warm cloaks, blankets, tunics, sails for ships. Nearly every piece of cloth used in the village began here, inside the home. Women also cared for the family's precious food stores. They knew exactly how much grain remained, which berries had been preserved, how much dried fish still hung from the rafters. They constantly planned ahead, thinking not about tomorrow, but about the coming winter. Children naturally gathered around them. Young hands eagerly copied every movement, learning how to knead bread, patch clothing, prepare meals, care for younger brothers and sisters. Knowledge passed quietly, from one generation to the next. When illness entered the village, women often became healers. They gathered herbs from nearby forests, prepared warm drinks, wrapped wounds, comforted frightened children. While medicine remained simple, care itself became powerful. Many women also managed the household whenever their husbands traveled. A trading voyage might last weeks, sometimes months. Every important decision rested upon their shoulders. Animals still needed feeding. Fields still required attention. Repairs still had to be made. Life simply continued. Archaeologists have discovered something remarkable. Some Viking women were buried with keys. Beautiful iron keys hanging from their belts. These were far more than practical tools. They symbolized responsibility, trust, leadership within the household. Holding the keys meant holding the home together. Not every woman's life looked exactly the same. Some became skilled merchants. Others owned farms. Some even traveled alongside their families. The Viking world offered more opportunities than many people imagine. Yet despite their many responsibilities, life still contained quiet moments. Sitting beside the doorway beneath warm afternoon sunlight, watching children play, listening to birds singing beyond the fields, sharing stories with neighbors while weaving together. Small moments of peace, woven gently into busy days. As evening approached, the longhouse slowly filled once more. Fresh bread rested upon the table. Warm stews simmered above the fire. Children laughed nearby. The family gathered together. And once again, the quiet work of countless unseen hours became visible, not in grand monuments, but in full stomachs, warm clothing, healthy children, and a peaceful home. The Viking world often celebrated great explorers, but every explorer, every sailor, every child, and every elder returned each evening to the warmth that these remarkable women had quietly created. Soon, we'll leave the longhouse behind once more, and discover the craftsmen whose skilled hands shaped nearly everything the Vikings owned. The blacksmith's fire. Long before the first rays of sunlight reached the village, one fire was already burning. Not inside the longhouse, not beneath the cooking pot, but inside a small wooden workshop, where sparks danced endlessly into the cool northern air. This was the blacksmith's forge, one of the busiest places in every Viking settlement. The blacksmith was more than a craftsman. He was a problem solver. When an axe broke, people came to him. When a knife became dull, they came to him. When a farmer needed new tools, or a fisherman required fresh hooks, the blacksmith quietly went to work. The forge never remained silent. Bellows breathed steadily, feeding air into glowing coals. Iron slowly changed from dark gray to deep red to brilliant orange. Only then was it ready. The blacksmith lifted the glowing metal carefully with long iron tongs. Every movement was calm, practiced, patient. Then came the hammer. Tap, tap, tap. The steady rhythm echoed through the workshop. Not hurried, not violent, simply deliberate. Each strike gently shaped the hot iron. To a visitor, the workshop might seem noisy, but to those who lived nearby, the sound became comforting. It meant tools were being repaired. Life was continuing. The village was preparing for another season. The smell inside the forge was unforgettable. Smoke, hot iron, fresh charcoal, warm timber. Every surface carried years of careful work. Children often watched from a safe distance, wide-eyed, curious. The glowing metal almost seemed magical. How could cold stone become soft enough to bend? How could a glowing bar of iron become a beautiful knife? To them, it must have looked like magic. Yet there was no magic. Only knowledge. Knowledge passed quietly, from one generation to the next. A young apprentice watched every movement, learning not from books, but through observation, through repetition, through patience. The blacksmith created far more than weapons. Most days, he rarely made a sword. Instead, he forged nails, door hinges, cooking hooks, farm tools, horseshoes, fishing hooks, woodworking chisels, simple objects. Yet without them, daily life became much harder. Even the famous Viking ships depended upon his skill. Thousands of iron rivets held every plank together. Every one had passed through hands like his. Without the blacksmith, the ships would never leave the shore. As evening approached, the forge slowly grew quieter. The glowing iron cooled. The hammer rested upon the workbench. The final sparks drifted upward into the darkening sky. Another day's work had quietly ended. Tomorrow, before sunrise, the fire would burn once again. And somewhere nearby, another broken tool would patiently wait for the steady hands of the village blacksmith. Soon, we'll leave the warmth of the forge and walk into the bustling marketplace, where people from distant lands gathered to trade stories, goods, and ideas. Trade, markets, and merchant towns. Not every Viking sailed in search of glory. Many sailed in search of something much quieter. A fair trade. A new friendship. A better future for their family. On calm summer mornings, merchant ships slipped quietly away from their villages. Unlike warships, these boats carried no warriors. Instead, their decks were filled with barrels, wooden chests, bundles of wool, animal furs, iron tools, amber, honey, and carefully crafted jewelry. Every item had been made by someone's patient hands. Every item represented weeks, sometimes months, of careful work. The sea connected thousands of people. A merchant might leave Norway, visit Denmark, continue to England, sail onward to Ireland, or follow great rivers deep into Eastern Europe. Some journeys lasted only days. Others continued for months. Yet each voyage began the same way. A quiet farewell beside the village shore. Trade rarely happened in complete silence. Markets were wonderfully alive. Not noisy in the modern sense, but full of gentle activity. Voices speaking different languages. Wooden carts rolling across packed earth. Children running between stalls. The smell of fresh bread mixing with smoked fish. The distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer. Everything blended into one peaceful rhythm. Some merchant towns slowly became gathering places for people from every direction. English traders arrived carrying fine cloth. Frankish merchants brought beautiful glassware. Travelers from the east offered silver coins, spices, and colorful fabrics unlike anything found in Scandinavia. Each visitor carried more than goods. They carried stories, ideas, news from distant lands. Imagine standing in one of these marketplaces. You might hear half a dozen languages before midday. A sailor describing warm southern cities. Another speaking of endless forests to the east. Someone else quietly explaining strange customs from lands beyond the horizon. For many Vikings, the marketplace became their window into the wider world. Trading required trust. A good reputation mattered more than quick profit. A merchant known for honesty would always find willing customers. One known for cheating might never be welcomed again. In small communities, your character traveled faster than your ship. Silver became one of the most valuable trading materials. Instead of paper money, people often weighed pieces of silver. Tiny scales rested upon wooden tables. Small weights carefully measured every transaction. Payment depended upon weight, not appearance. Amber remained especially prized. This beautiful golden stone, washed ashore by northern seas, glowed warmly in the sunlight. Craftsmen shaped it into necklaces, bracelets, and decorative carvings. Far from Scandinavia, people considered amber almost magical. The Vikings themselves admired beautiful craftsmanship wherever they found it. A finely woven cloth, a perfectly balanced knife, an elegant glass cup. Beauty deserved appreciation, no matter where it came from. Market days were also social occasions. Old friends met again. Families shared meals together. Children explored rows of colorful goods with endless curiosity. Musicians occasionally played simple melodies. Travelers rested tired feet before continuing their long journeys. The marketplace reminded everyone that the world was much larger than their own village. As evening approached, stalls slowly disappeared. Goods returned to wagons. Ships were loaded once more. Campfires flickered beside the shoreline. Merchants shared one final meal together before another sunrise carried them onward. Some returned home. Others continued toward unknown coasts. Yet wherever they traveled, they carried a small piece of Scandinavia with them. Its craftsmanship, its honesty, its quiet resilience. Tomorrow, new ships would arrive. New faces would appear. New stories would be told. And the marketplace would once again become the meeting place of the Viking world. Soon, we'll leave the busy harbor behind and step into a quieter world where ancient gods, old legends, and gentle stories filled the long northern nights. Gods, myths, festivals, and stories beside the fire. As darkness settled across the village, life did not simply stop. It slowed. The day's work was finished. The animals had been fed. The boats rested safely beside the shore. The longhouse became warm once again. Outside, the wind wandered through the pine trees. Snow sometimes drifted softly against the walls. The stars quietly appeared above the mountains. Inside, the fire glowed brighter than ever. Its gentle light danced across wooden beams. Faces flickered between light and shadow. The smell of fresh bread, wood smoke, and warm wool filled the room. This was the favorite part of the day. Not because work was over, but because stories were about to begin. Long before books became common, stories carried history. Parents remembered them. Grandparents added to them. Children listened carefully, knowing they would one day tell the same stories themselves. Some stories explained the world. Why thunder rolled across the mountains. Why winter always returned. Why the seas sometimes remained calm, and sometimes became wild beyond imagination. The Vikings believed powerful gods watched over the world. The wisest was Odin, a traveler, a seeker of knowledge. He wandered the world, always searching for greater understanding. To the Vikings, wisdom mattered just as much as strength. Then there was Thor, protector of ordinary people. When thunder echoed across the northern sky, many believed Thor was riding through the clouds. his mighty hammer sending great cracks across the heavens. Storms became less frightening when they carried the footsteps of a familiar protector. Freya represented beauty, love, and the changing seasons. Farmers welcomed the arrival of spring, believing new life returned under her gentle care. Flowers blooming across the fields, newborn lambs, and longer days, all reminded them that winter never lasted forever. There were many other stories. Some spoke of giants living beyond distant mountains. Others whispered of clever tricksters, hidden spirits, and mysterious creatures deep inside ancient forests. No one truly knew where stories ended and belief began. Perhaps that was the beauty of them. One legend spoke of a great ash tree, Yggdrasil. Its branches stretched across the heavens. Its roots reached deep beneath the earth. The entire universe, they believed, rested upon this enormous tree. Humans, animals, gods, and every living thing were somehow connected beneath its endless branches. It was a comforting thought that everything belonged together. The changing seasons also brought festivals. As winter finally loosened its grip, villages gathered to celebrate the return of sunlight. Long tables filled with food. Neighbors shared laughter. Children played happily among friends. Music drifted through the evening air. Not every celebration was grand. Sometimes, simply surviving another winter was reason enough. Musicians carried simple instruments, wooden flutes, small drums, beautiful lyres whose gentle strings filled the longhouse with soft melodies. People sang familiar songs, some joyful, some peaceful, some so old that no one remembered who had first created them. The fire slowly burned lower. One story ended. Another quietly began. Children rested against their parents. Eyes slowly grew heavy. Outside, snow continued falling silently. Inside, voices became softer. The stories no longer excited the mind. They gently settled it, like falling leaves upon still water. Perhaps that was their greatest purpose. Not simply to entertain, but to remind every listener that they belong to a family, to a village, to generations stretching far into the past, and generations still waiting to come. The final log was placed upon the fire. Warm light filled the room once more. The storyteller smiled. Silence slowly returned. Only the crackling flames continued speaking. Soon, our journey will enter its final chapter of life, where wisdom grows quietly with age. Old healers pass their knowledge forward, and every Viking hopes to leave the world just a little stronger than they found it. Growing old in the Viking world, no one remained young forever. Not the strongest blacksmith, not the fastest sailor, not even the bravest explorer. The years passed quietly, almost unnoticed. One season became another. Children became parents. Parents slowly became grandparents. And life continued, just as it always had. Old age arrived gently. A little more gray in the beard. A few more lines upon weathered hands. Steps that became slower than before. Yet something else quietly grew stronger. Experience. In a Viking village, older people were deeply respected, not because they could swing an axe the hardest, but because they remembered. They remembered difficult winters. They remembered great storms. They remembered harvests that failed, and those that flourished. Their memories became the village's greatest library. When younger people faced difficult decisions, they often sought the advice of their elders. Not because the elders always had perfect answers, but because they had already lived through similar moments. Experience had become their greatest gift. Grandparents spent long hours with children, teaching simple skills, showing them how to carve wood, how to tie fishing knots, how to recognize safe plants in the forest, how to read the changing weather simply by watching the sky. Lessons passed quietly, without classrooms, without books, only through patient hands. Many older women became respected healers. Their knowledge had been gathered over decades. They knew which herbs soothed fever, which leaves eased pain, which roots helped tired stomachs. Medicine remained simple, yet careful observation often proved surprisingly effective. Healing was never only about herbs. Sometimes, the greatest comfort came from company. A warm blanket, a gentle voice, a reassuring hand resting softly upon someone's shoulder. Even today, those things remain powerful medicine. Life was not always easy. Illness sometimes arrived without warning. Accidents happened. The sea occasionally claimed those who ventured too far. The Vikings understood something every generation eventually learns. Life was precious, because it was never guaranteed. Perhaps that is why they appreciated ordinary days so deeply. A peaceful breakfast, children laughing, fresh bread, warm sunshine after weeks of snow. Simple moments became extraordinary gifts. As old age continued, daily work naturally became lighter. Grandparents no longer carried the heaviest timber. They no longer rode the longest journeys. Instead, they watched over grandchildren, repaired simple tools, told familiar stories beside the fire. Their hands slowed. Their wisdom grew. Evenings became especially meaningful. 3 generations often sat together beneath one roof. The youngest listening, the oldest remembering, the fire connecting them all. Outside, the northern wind continued blowing exactly as it always had. Inside, time itself seemed wonderfully still. No one truly disappears, while their stories continue being told. The Vikings understood this deeply. A kind grandfather lived on. Every time his grandson repeated an old lesson, a wise grandmother remained present. Every time someone prepared herbs exactly as she once had, knowledge became a quiet form of immortality. Eventually, every life reached its peaceful conclusion, not with great fanfare, but surrounded by family, familiar voices, and the home that had sheltered them for countless seasons. The village continued. Children grew older. New babies were born. Fresh stories began. The rhythm of life never truly ended. It simply passed gently, from one generation to the next. Now, our own journey is almost complete. Only one peaceful evening remains. The fires are burning low. The stars are beginning to appear. And all of Scandinavia is slowly preparing for sleep. A day on the Viking farm. Before the ships. Before the marketplaces. Before the distant journeys. There was the farm. For most Viking families, the farm was life itself. It provided food, warmth, clothing, and the quiet certainty that another winter might be survived. As dawn spread across the valley, the fields slowly awakened. Tiny drops of dew rested upon blades of grass. Mist drifted lazily above nearby streams. The air smelled fresh, cool, and wonderfully clean. Long before breakfast, someone was already outside. The animals needed attention. They could not wait. Cows greeted the morning with slow, gentle calls. Sheep wandered patiently toward fresh grass. Goats eagerly searched every hillside. Even the chickens seemed to know that another busy day had begun. Every animal held great importance. Cows gave milk. Sheep offered warm wool. Goats provided both milk and meat. Pigs searched forests for acorns, turning nature itself into food. Horses pulled heavy wagons and carried travelers across long distances. Even dogs worked faithfully, guarding animals and helping during hunts. The fields demanded equal care. Barley swayed gently beneath the northern breeze. Oats stretched across the hillsides. Rye grew wherever the soil allowed. Nothing happened quickly. Months of patient work rested inside every harvest. There were no noisy machines, no roaring engines, only simple wooden plows, strong hands, and steady determination. Oxen slowly pulled the plow across dark earth. Each furrow appeared one careful line at a time. The work was slow, yet somehow beautiful. Children followed behind, dropping precious seeds into freshly opened soil. Every handful carried hope. Hope for full grain stores. Hope for healthy animals. Hope that winter would arrive. After enough food had been gathered, the weather remained everyone's greatest concern. Too much rain damaged crops. Too little rain did the same. No one could command the sky. Farmers simply observed, waited, adapted. Nature always decided the final outcome. During summer, the fields glowed deep green beneath endless northern sunlight. Wildflowers covered nearby meadows. Bees drifted lazily between blossoms. Butterflies floated almost without effort. The countryside seemed wonderfully alive. Harvest season transformed the village. Entire families worked together. Neighbors helped neighbors. Laughter echoed across golden fields. Bundles of grain slowly filled wooden carts. No one hurried. Yet everyone understood how important every hour had become. As autumn arrived, the final harvest was carefully stored. Granaries slowly filled. Hay stacked higher and higher beside the barns. The smell of fresh straw drifted through the cool air. Winter no longer seemed frightening. Preparation brought comfort. By evening, the animals quietly returned to their shelters. The fields rested beneath the fading sunlight. Farmers leaned their tools against wooden fences. Another ordinary day had come to an end. No songs celebrated these simple labors. No great sagas were written about planting barley or gathering hay. Yet without these peaceful days, None of the famous Viking voyages would ever have been possible. Every explorer, every merchant, every sailor, first belonged to a farm. As darkness gently settled across the valley, the village grew quiet once more. The fields waited patiently for tomorrow, and somewhere nearby, the soft ringing of sheep bells slowly faded into the peaceful northern night. Clothing, wool, and staying warm. The north was beautiful, but it was never gentle. Even during summer, the mornings carried a cool breeze. Autumn arrived quickly. Winter stayed for months. Without warm clothing, life became dangerous. The Vikings understood this well. Their clothing was not created to impress. It was created to survive. Every thread served a purpose. Every layer protected against wind, rain, or snow. Most clothing began with sheep. Large flocks grazed peacefully across grassy hillsides. Their thick wool became one of the village's greatest treasures. Each spring, the sheep were carefully sheared. Soft fleece was gathered into large woven baskets. The work had only just begun. The wool was washed in fresh streams. Tiny twigs and dirt were patiently removed. Then it was left to dry beneath the northern sun. Only after many hours could spinning begin. A wooden spindle slowly twisted the wool into long strands of yarn. Round and round it turned. Patiently. Without hurry. Children often learn this skill while still very young. Older hands guided younger ones. Knowledge quietly passed from one generation to the next. Once enough thread had been prepared, the great loom came alive again. Its steady rhythm filled the longhouse. Click, pull, click, pull. Hour after hour, beautiful cloths slowly appeared. Not through speed, but through patience. Natural colors surrounded the Vikings. Brown, gray, cream, deep green, soft blue. Occasionally, plants and berries produced gentle dyes. Roots, leaves, and tree bark created warm shades of red, yellow, or muted blue. Nothing looked overly bright. Everything reflected the quiet colors of nature. Most men wore long wool tunics, belted comfortably around the waist. Loose trousers allowed easy movement while farming, rowing, or walking through forests. Strong leather shoes protected their feet from rough ground. Simple wool cloaks added another layer against cold winds. Women usually wore long dresses beneath warm wool overdresses. Beautiful oval brooches fastened the straps across their shoulders. These small pieces of metal were both useful and beautifully crafted. Many became treasured family possessions, passed from mother to daughter. Leather belts carried everyday tools. A small knife, a pouch, perhaps a comb carved from bone. Everything had its place. Nothing unnecessary weighed them down. During winter, layers became essential. Thicker cloaks, extra wool blankets, fur-lined garments made from sheep, fox, or other animals. Warm mittens protected frozen fingers. Soft hats covered ears against icy winds. Keeping warm became a daily skill. Even indoors, warm clothing remained important. The fire heated the center of the longhouse. but cooler air still gathered near the walls. Families naturally stayed close together, sharing both conversation and warmth. Clothing was valuable. Nothing was thrown away. A torn sleeve was carefully repaired. A worn cloak received another patch. Children often wore garments that older brothers or sisters had already outgrown. Every piece of cloth represented countless hours of work. Waste simply made no sense. At the end of each day, wet cloaks hung beside the fire. Leather boots slowly dried. Fresh wool blankets waited upon wooden benches. Tomorrow, they would once again protect their owners against another northern morning. The Vikings never needed elaborate wardrobes. They only needed clothing they could trust. Warm, strong, reliable. Much like the people themselves. Soon, our peaceful journey will return to the quiet shores of the fjords, where another gentle evening settles across Scandinavia, and the world's love, marriage, and family traditions. Not every great journey began upon the sea. Some began with two people choosing to build a life together. In the Viking world, family stood at the very center of everything. The longhouse, the farm, the fields, the stories. Every generation depended upon the one before it. And every child would one day guide the generation that followed. Marriage was not simply the joining of two people. It was the joining of two families. Two households. Two futures. Everyone hoped such a union would bring peace, friendship, and strength to both sides. Long before the wedding day, families met together. They shared meals, spoke openly, discussed the future. The conversations were calm, careful, and respectful. Building trust mattered just as much as celebrating love. When the day finally arrived, the village gathered. Friends, neighbors, relatives from nearby farms. Children ran happily between the adults. The smell of fresh bread, roasted meat, and warm stew drifted gently through the air. Laughter spread naturally from one family to another. There were no towering churches. Many ceremonies took place outdoors, beneath the open sky. The forests, the mountains, and the sea quietly surrounded everyone, as though nature itself wished to witness the occasion. Simple gifts were exchanged, not because they were expensive, but because they carried meaning. A carefully crafted brooch, a finely carved wooden bowl, a warm wool blanket, a well-made knife. Objects created with patience often became the most treasured possessions. Music followed the celebration. Wooden flutes played gentle melodies. A lyre softly accompanied familiar songs. Some people danced. Others simply sat together, smiling as children laughed nearby. No one hurried the day. Moments like these deserved time. Soon, the celebration quietly faded into evening. Guests slowly returned home. The fire inside the longhouse glowed warmly. Another family had begun its journey together. The years passed quietly. Children were born. The household grew. Grandparents shared stories. Parents taught skills. Young hands slowly became capable hands. Life continued. Not through great battles, But through ordinary mornings, shared meals, and countless small acts of kindness, love rarely appeared in dramatic moments. Instead, it lived quietly inside everyday life, sharing the final piece of bread, repairing someone's worn cloak, waiting patiently beside a sick family member, helping gather firewood before winter arrived. These simple acts spoke more loudly than grand declarations ever could. As parents grew older, their children naturally carried more responsibility. No one truly stood alone. The family moved forward together, each person supporting the others. That quiet sense of belonging became one of the greatest strengths of Viking society. Outside, the seasons continued changing. Spring became summer. Summer became autumn. Autumn welcomed another peaceful winter. Yet inside the longhouse, one thing remained beautifully constant: family. And perhaps, after all these centuries, that is the part of Viking life that feels most familiar to us today. Soon, our journey will enter its final peaceful evening. The fire burns low. The stars quietly appear above the fjords. And the long northern day slowly prepares to become night. A peaceful night in Scandinavia. The work was finished. The fields rested quietly beneath the fading light. Fishing boats rocked gently against their wooden posts. The forge had grown silent. Even the animals settled peacefully into their shelters. Another ordinary day had come to an end. The sky slowly changed. Golden sunlight faded into soft shades of pink. Pink became lavender. Lavender became deep blue. One by one, the first stars quietly appeared above the mountains. The fjord reflected every color. Its surface became perfectly still. Not a ripple disturbed the water. The mountain stood silently upon its edge, unchanged for thousands of years. Patient, unmoving, watching another evening gently unfold. Thin smoke drifted upward from every longhouse. The smell of burning pine filled the cool evening air. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then fell silent again. Inside the longhouse, the fire glowed warmly. The day's final meal had been shared. Wooden bowls were carefully stacked. Children rubbed tired eyes. Parents smiled quietly. No one seemed eager to speak very loudly anymore. The room itself seemed to relax. The crackling fire became softer. The wind outside whispered gently across the grass-covered roof. The warm light danced lazily across wooden walls polished by generations of careful hands. Someone quietly added another log to the fire. Tiny sparks floated upward before disappearing into the darkness above. Everyone watched for a moment. No words were needed. The silence felt comfortable, almost familiar. Outside, the northern air grew colder. Frost slowly settled across the fields. Tiny crystals formed upon wooden fences. Moonlight reflected across the quiet snow. The village looked almost dreamlike. Far above, green ribbons slowly appeared across the sky. The northern lights. They drifted silently from one horizon to the other. No sound accompanied them. Only quiet wonder. Every generation had looked upon this same sky. Every generation had paused, just for a moment, to admire its beauty. The youngest children had already fallen asleep, wrapped beneath thick wool blankets, curled safely beside parents, brothers, sisters, and grandparents. Their breathing became slow, steady, peaceful. The older members of the family remained awake just a little longer, watching the fire, listening to the wind, remembering another ordinary day now becoming a memory. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again. The cows would wait patiently. The boats would return to the water. The fields would welcome careful hands once more. Life would continue, just as it always had. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight, there was only warmth, quiet, family, and the comforting feeling of being home. The fire slowly burned lower. Its glowing embers became deep shades of orange and red. The room grew darker. The conversations quietly disappeared. One by one, everyone drifted peacefully into sleep. Outside, the stars continued their silent journey across the northern sky. The mountains remained still. The forests rested peacefully. The sea reflected the moon like polished silver. Everything felt calm. Everything felt safe. Everything felt exactly as it should. And somewhere, far across the quiet fjord, another small village was doing exactly the same. Another family gathered beside another warm fire. Another child slowly falling asleep. Another peaceful night. In the timeless land of the Vikings. Now, our own journey gently comes to rest. May your thoughts drift as softly as the northern wind. May your dreams be as peaceful as the quiet fjords. And may you sleep deeply, until another beautiful morning arrives. Good night.